Welcome to the Binary Agora. I'm your host, Alba Ribera Martínez, and building on the previous episodes we already had in the channel, where we discussed Google's when introducing AI-based features, the sharing of access to search data to competitors under the DMA. I have the pleasure to talk today with Todd Davies, who is a PhD student and a graduate lecturer in competition law at University College London. Prior to that, he was a full-stack software engineering, mostly working on security and privacy projects at Google. So welcome to the Agora, Todd.
Thank you so much for having me, Alba. And I should additionally disclose that I've fully finished working at Google now. There's no ongoing relations, so I'm just purely an academic.
That's good to know. As our audience will know, Google introduced a couple of years ago the idea of integrating in its search engine experience an AI-based feature operating simply as a chatbot for users querying the web, AI overviews. In a paper that you co-authored with Spencer Cohen, you argue that AI overviews has transformed the search engine from a portal to a destination. I wanted to ask you whether that is a framing that came naturally from your technical background, or rather, is it something that you arrived at through legal analysis?
It's always hard to think about where ideas come from, isn't it? Spencer, who's a wonderful co-author, him and I are talking all the time. These ideas just pop up from this mind meld that we have. The most honest, truthful answer is it emerged from our conversations, but there are definitely technical and legal elements. On the technical side, having built and run websites myself, and wanting people to go and visit those websites, have the perspective of website owners and publishers. That's kind of what I came in with. And also having worked in tech with people who are thinking about how to design websites, user experience researchers, I think I drew on their concepts of what they might call a user journey. First of all, if you want to build a website, if you're doing this in the first place, you want people to go and visit your website. That's absolutely the key thing. And anyone who has a website probably knows that they'll be checking the analytics often to see, what content did I put on there? How many people came? It's hugely instrumental to what you're trying to do. And when you're thinking about that as someone who's designing websites, often you're thinking about what's the user journey? What is the journey that a user goes on when they're trying to get to your website? What are they trying to do? For Google search, that probably goes something like this. I'm a user. I want to search for some kind of information. I come up with a query that I think will help get me towards that information. I type it into Google and it gives me a list of results. And then I surf the web until I can find the information that I want. In that model, Google is essentially routing traffic around the internet. As the user on your user journey, you are the traffic. You're going through Google into somewhere else. The whole architecture of the open web is built around that idea, that people will go to websites. When AI Overview came in, that journey got a few steps shorter. Because all of a sudden, instead of being routed through Google to another destination, in many cases, users didn't do that. Users got the answer that they wanted on the AI overview itself, read the answer, were satisfied, and then didn't click further onto the websites that produced that content in the first place. That's where the technical perspective has come from. That's how I thought about it as a previous engineer. On the legal side, my PhD is on how dominant undertakings can harm the effective structure of competition. When I was looking at this from a legal perspective, what I was thinking about, what is the competition? And what are we competing over here? As a dominant undertaking, Google has a special responsibility not to allow its behavior to impair genuine, undistorted competition there. Those are the questions I was thinking about. Google's search page has always been a competitive space. As I mentioned, all these websites are desperately vying to get traffic. It's not really the conventional market-mediated competitive space. Although there are elements of that, for example, with search advertising and search engine optimization, where undertakings spend billions of dollars all the time on trying to get their websites higher up the list. It's very clear that there is competition for website traffic. And we saw that in other cases as well. We saw that in Google Shopping, for example. And this traffic for the business model of those undertakings is really, really important. It helps them monetize, it helps them advertise, it helps them get sales, brand build, etc., etc. What we know empirically speaking, and there's oodles of evidence about this now, is that AI overviews essentially mean that traffic doesn't go onto those websites. As a consumer, as a user on this user journey, your want for information has been satisfied not by the third party, but by Google. When you read the AI overview. So it seems to me that Google is competing directly against those websites that are in its search results, against the news providers or the recipe websites or whoever it is. When you accept that A, traffic is a contested resource, and B, that the want of users is satisfied by this AI overview, in the same way that it will be satisfied by the third party, then it suddenly begins to look like Google has impaired the genuine, undistorted nature of competition for traffic on its platforms. Those are the two perspectives that I came in with here.
The introduction of AI overs has actually faced some backlash coming from very different perspectives and on many different fronts. For instance, coming from publishers, competition authorities, consumer protection agencies. Within this theory that you're putting forward, building on the diversion of traffic, what would you say the main competitive problem is here?
For Spencer and I, the main issue that we think is this harm to traffic competition. And the knock-on effects of that are really big, and publishers talk about this all the time. Click-through rates that are dropping is catastrophic for independent websites and even big websites that are big newsrooms, for example. But there's also a bunch of other kind of harms which are important to talk about because they're ones that other people focus on more than perhaps Spencer and I. One is the harm to publishers' choice, something we didn't talk about yet. And this has got the most attention from publishers themselves and from competition authorities. The idea here is that publishers are allowed to opt out of their content appearing in AI overview, but only if they opt out of appearing in Google search altogether. This is not a very good choice if you're a publisher because, again, you want to get traffic. Google search is a major source of traffic for you. This choice to either opt into everything or opt out of everything is not a very good choice. It's what Maurice Stuckey calls a Hobson's choice. Essentially, what this looks like is Google has monopoly power in terms of it consuming content, and it then uses that monopoly power to dictate unfavorable terms to publishers, which looks a lot like an exploitative abuse. That's the second issue. The knock-on effects of that is that because Google essentially can coerce publishers to stay opted into its AI overview and opted into allowing their content to be used for its AI training, the Commission is concerned that this could allow Google to have an advantage when it comes to training its own AI models vis-a-vis other undertakings that are also trying to train their AI models because they don't have that big search engine that can give them that leverage to gain access to training data. That's the third issue. And then the fourth one, which is a bit more esoteric, is that this is harming the consumer choice-based model of competition. To go back to what I was talking about before about surfing the web, this word surfing I think is really nice because you can kind of imagine going between different websites and directing yourself as an individual where you are in the driver's seat, if you like. Which websites get clicks basically depends on your choices and your decision to go, oh, that looks interesting, I'll go there. That is what exists in the pre-AI overview search page. When you have AI overview at the top, the temptation to surf is a lot less. Instead of this distributed mechanism of traffic allocation where Google ranks based off essentially this algorithm which looks at how popular each website is relative to others, and then within that ranking users choosing, this is not the same as market competition, but it has a lot of the same characteristics of it. It's quite meritocratic in a distributed way. Instead of that, AI overview does that for you. It's a bit like the central planning version of search. Can that be directly translated into competition law harm? It's not that easy to do that. You could point to Google Android, paragraph 1028, which talks about the importance of a plurality of different methods of getting information in a democratic society. And if Google is monopolizing search and it has this one AI that we use, obviously the kind of issues relating to that. But I think it's something that we should be thinking about, the consumer choice-based image of normatively how do we want to structure markets? Those are the four different concerns that we were thinking of.
Stemming from these concerns, the European Commission has already triggered, as you said, a proceeding under Article 102 against Google. Several ideas have been floated as regards to the potential solutions to address these competitive problems caused by the dominant undertaking, in this case, Google. However, in the paper, you argue that the real harm is traffic diversion and rather not the lack of publisher choice. And this is an argument that regulators really disagree with. What do you think that explains the gap between your understanding of this case, your diagnosis, and their perspective?
This is something that Spencer and I wrestled with a lot because we were quite confident in the way that we were thinking about this. This is traffic diversion, this is traffic hoarding. But as you said, the Commission and also publishers themselves have really been going for this choice-based approach where publishers should be able to opt out of AI overview, but not opt out of Google search. And this didn't make any sense to Spencer and I. We think that the Commission and publishers know this way better than we do. They have a lot of people, they have better access to information, and they know the business model better. We were really confused. First off, it's important to state that we agree with that framing. It's not wrong. Google does have monopoly power. It is essentially exploiting that monopoly power to give publishers a bad choice. So it's legitimate. I think the question is more about the focus. And do we focus on the choice or do we focus on harm to competition as such? I don't think there's a right answer. That explains the disagreement. They're both relevant and it depends on where your priorities lie. If you're a publisher, you're thinking about your business model in particular and your ability to gain revenue from your business model at the end of the day. What an opt-out can give you materially is bargaining power against Google. If you have the ability to opt out of AI overview, you can maybe, as an industry, be able to exercise that and push back against this use of AI in search. I think that is probably an important tool in the arsenal of publishers, strategically speaking, going forward, because this is not their only battle. There's all these different areas where that might be applied. For example, AI overview isn't the only place people get information. You can also go to Gemini or Claude or ChatGPT and ask it a similar question, and it will do essentially the same thing. AI overview is essentially a one-shot chatbot, isn't it? So I think from that perspective, it makes sense that publishers are looking to gain this additional tool. Then maybe the second issue for why the Commission might be more kind of tempted by this is that it's very difficult to think what the remedy would be if you were to think about the traffic diversion. The choice-based remedy, where you're trying to give publishers additional choice, is politically speaking a lot, and legally speaking, a little bit easier. If you were to tell Google AI overview is fundamentally harming the effective structure of competition and is not compatible with the common market, and you have to stop doing it, that is a politically difficult remedy to bring forward. From my perspective as an academic, the question is, how do we then motivate that remedy at the end of the day? Is that really the case, or should we find legal arguments to buttress that?
As you already mentioned, the opt-out remedy that for instance, the European Commission is seeking, not on all Google search, but rather on opting out only to AI overviews, would not really be effective to try to counter all of these problems caused by this one-shot chatbot. You also argue in the paper that it could even entrench Google's powers. Why do you think that? And what alternatives do you propose instead? And how, in the end, can we make the search engine market more contestable?
Why are opt-out remedies not very helpful, I think, is the first question. The two issues that we see are first, correspondence, and second, choice. Correspondence is that the remedy must address the harm. Spencer and I disagree with publishers and the Commission about what the key harm is here. And that's where our disagreement stems from with regards to correspondence. If you're purely interested in choice, then yes, the opt-out remedy does help a little bit, but we don't think it really helps that much. And I'll get into that in a second when I get into some of the unintended risks of an opt-out remedy. We think that the deeper issue is traffic hoarding. Therefore, the remedy doesn't address that at all. It doesn't have correspondence, essentially. And that comes down to how you frame the case, what the abuse is. The second is choice. We don't think that the ability to opt out of AI overview will improve the choice set for publishers. If they have this Hobson's choice today, stay opted in or opt out of everything entirely, will that new choice put them in a better situation? We think it won't. Why is that? Well, there's a bunch of reasons. The first reason is that each individual publisher has an incentive to stay opted in, because when you're opted into AI overview, you are cited in the AI overview and you will get some clicks from being cited in there. If you have the choice, do I stay in or stay out? And your overriding concern is that, well, I need traffic. Individually, you have an incentive to opt in. Perhaps as an industry, you might have, want to build bargaining power and try and opt out. Then we get to a bunch of issues around Article 101, but that's a separate question. We didn't really think about that. There's a bunch of unintended risks that we think that can arise from this remedy as well, some of which also correspond to this not being a good choice. Let's say you're a news publisher in particular, and you've done a big investigation of the order of magnitude of Watergate or some big scandal. And this is very expensive to do all that investigative journalism, pay the legal costs. What you need is a return on investment. You publish your articles, you're hoping to get lots of traffic on your website, you're hoping to make lots of newspaper sales, but you've opted out of AI overviews. What happens is with any big story like that, other newspapers will do secondary reporting. Essentially, all the information will still be there on those other news platforms. If those other news organizations have remained opted in, their content will be used in the AI overview. From the user's perspective, nothing has changed. From the publisher's perspective, it's much worse because now other news organizations will be cited in AI overview as having been the authoritative source of this information. Your news organization, having done all that work, all that investment, won't get any of the benefit from this at all. Not only is that misattribution, it also introduces a bunch of steps between the original source of the content and the content that the consumer actually receives, which can obviously introduce errors that maybe could add up to more significant issues. And the second issue is that when people start to opt out of AI overview, maybe the quality of the AI overview drops. At the end of the day, is an issue for Google to solve. But from a consumer welfare point of view, presumably we want to have AI overviews having as many people opted in as possible. That's something to think about. And then lastly, there's harms. We think that this remedy could be exploited perhaps by some actors, or some websites might be opting out that are very good websites, and websites that are not very good and just want to get any traffic from wherever might remain opted in. And then we have a bunch of issues. First, misinformation. If those low quality websites don't have good content, then that could end up in AI overviews. And as we know, it's difficult to get AIs to always say the truth or what might be objectively factual. And this grounding process is one of those ways that happens. As soon as you have high quality websites opting out, then grounding becomes a lot more difficult. Secondly, if you have a politically asymmetric pattern of opt-outs, let's say a lot of websites on one part of the political spectrum opted out, but on the other part of the political spectrum, they remained opted in, then all of a sudden that may be reflected in the AI overview itself. In a world today where there is a lot of money in politics, it's there's not a clear separation between these domains always. This could be relevant. And because the opt-out remedy is something which a competition authority is putting forward, then it becomes relevant to think about these knock-on effects. The paper's essentially bashing the opt-out remedy quite a lot. And it's always mean to do that and then not try and be productive and put something forward. We did try and chart 3 paths forward, like what can come next. The first one is, instead of opt-out, why could it not be an opt-in regime? This is something that Madhavi Singh and Fiona Scott-Morton suggested in a paper, also on AI overviews. And this could help redress the balance of power between publishers and Google. Essentially, it would make Google work a little bit harder to get publishers on board to make them opt in. It flips the default away from Google in that case. Crucially, we don't think that it addresses the fundamental issues pertaining to misattribution, quality, and misinformation, and all those different issues. It still has this core harm to the process of traffic competition, which is not addressed there. So that's the first path, which is better, but we think not complete. The second option is a licensing regime. This goes back to the business models of publishers themselves. AI overviews and other uses of generative AI to give content to consumers without sending to the websites undermines that business model because it's based off user traffic. A licensing regime where content is used for AI or generative AI and money is then paid back to the publishers of that content can serve as an alternative monetization path. The issue that we see here is that those publishers might then become structurally dependent on companies like Google. If Google or similar companies, Anthropic or whoever, is paying publishers for content, then all of a sudden you have systemic dependency. And when it comes to news production or any kind of content production, then there's the third option, which, full disclosure, is my personal favorite, is the cease and desist option. It's to say, well, hang on a second. Google has a special responsibility here not to allow its behavior to impair genuine undistorted competition. We have traffic competition that has now been impaired. Google has a responsibility, if it wants to introduce AI into its search engine, to do that without distorting that competition. There's all sorts of ways that it can try and do that. Google's an extremely innovative company. I know firsthand they're very, very good at what they do. It has a responsibility to build its products, to innovate in a way that does not undermine the business models of those who depend on its platform. Why do I think that is not such a crazy option? Well, because it's a lot less messy to begin with. It's very, very clear. It's very, very simple. And it's very, very easy to understand. and it doesn't get involved in the remedy design process at all. And it puts the ball back in Google's court to say, look, you can innovate however you want, but without undermining business models of people who are competing on your platform. That would be my quite strong, admittedly, but also pragmatic approach.
That's wonderful, and I invite everyone in the audience to read the paper available in JClub, if I'm not wrong, right? I will include a link below in the description. And thank you so much, Todd, for all of your thoughts, all of your ideas, and thank you so much for joining us here in the Agora. And I have heard that your PhD journey is finishing now, so I also really look forward to what comes for you next.
Thank you so much.